Hello and welcome to another episode of Myth, Magic, and Movies, the show where we take a look at all things gothic, horror, true crime, and supernatural and fantasy related, and we try to make sense of what's going on here. Um, so, if you've been following us for the past few months, I've been chatting with Michelle Medina Villalon, where we've been talking about figures from American folklore that she's put in her play Mythos, which premieres sometime around the spring. I don't want to say too much right now because I know that's something that you're kind of keeping, pretty tight-lipped about. But we've explored a lot of different characters in these episodes. We've looked at Marie Laveau, the voodoo queen of New Orleans, and we looked at the Lady in Red, who, even though we don't really know who she is, we know the kind of person that she is. And we briefly touched on La Llorona, and even with someone like La Llorona, we kind of know who she is and where she comes from. But there's one character in the play that kind of intrigues me, and this has been a character I've been fascinated with for quite a while, and it's the Bell Witch. And the Bell Witch features a lot in your play as well, because Michelle, you're taking these four figures from American folklore and kind of, would you say, kind of humanizing them or giving them a backstory? What's the best way to phrase that?
Yeah, I think both of those, humanizing them, kind of exploring, the women that could have been behind these societies. Yeah, I think that these four myths, at least in the show, are very representative of their time period and place. So we're kind of just bringing those sentiments and feelings and ideas to life.
And that's the thing too, because with the previous three figures that we've discussed, in a way, we know who they are and we can sort of sympathize with them, right? La Llorona, even though she did what she did, where she murdered her children, we can still, understand where she's coming from, even if we don't agree or sympathize with her actions, right? I mean, when you're caught in that situation where you feel like there's no way out, we've all been there. We can sort of relate to that. Marie Laveau, when we did our discussion of her, I was really trying to figure out why exactly she's vilified, because for the most part she was just a woman just trying to survive in New Orleans, and she actually did a lot of good in the city too. And even the Lady in Red, even though we don't know who she is, the fact that she was a prostitute who met an unfortunate end, there is something very tragic and sympathetic about it, because especially in that time period in the 19th century, women really didn't have that many options, so to kind of get forced into that situation, it's like, well, yeah, we can condemn it as much as we want, but there really isn't much we can kind of degrade them for, because they were forced into this position. They didn't have the many opportunities that women today enjoy. So with these three characters, we can understand and understand where they're coming from and sort of relate to who they are as people. The Bell Witch is kind of different, because I was doing my research over the past week, and I gotta say, Michelle, there are two things that crop up. First off is we don't really know what the Bell Witch looks like, right? Because she's most famous for being this voice, and even then, when she does make her appearances, it's very, very off-putting. I mean, the most famous example that I can think of is the black dog with the rabbit's head. So, and when people, when people feel her presence, they say they feel a presence, but they don't actually see it. How exactly do you go about giving form to a figure that is infamous for not having one?
Mm-hmm. There was a real opportunity, I felt like, when I started talking to my costume designer, and the actor playing the Bell Witch, that kind of came up, that similar question that, how do we portray a figure that nobody knows what they look like? Do we go, I don't think this was ever something we were considering, but being hyper realistic and pulling out some of those animal elements, And the opportunity that we found is that because the show focused so much on the female perspective and what are experiences that women go through, that maybe we don't talk about as much. And one of those that came up was the feeling of being invisible, right? Feeling that you are in a room, especially during that time period, and that you are felt. but you are not seen, or at least not seen beyond for just like your physical presence there. So one of the things that we really focused on, and I worked with my lighting designer to do this, we kind of broke with tradition and theatrical tradition. And I remember when we lit that particular section of the play, we kept it really dark, first of all. And I know that we got some criticism from, we were in college at the time, so professors, and was somebody who came from the Kennedy Center to give us feedback. They were like, well, we couldn't see her face. And the explanation that I gave is that that was very intentional. I mean, the whole point of the show was to be very environmental and kind of, immerse you rather than present something to you. But in that particular sequence of the Bell Witch, we wanted you to hear her voice. We wanted you to, like really listen to the words that she was saying, but maybe, like maintain that kind of elusive element. With her, we played a lot with sound. At one point we took her off stage and we just had her voice like echo over us. And when it came to actually costuming that character, we took a lot of inspiration from the way that art portrayed spirits during the 1800s. So we looked at fabric that was very, shimmery, very like impressionist almost kind of lines and design. And then for the actress's particular makeup, because the Bell Witch at points referred to being a Native American spirit that had been disturbed, we also pulled symbols and she drew them over her face as well. We were a little limited in budget. I think if I were to produce that show again, and we will, but I still need to figure that out. I would actually like to draw a little bit more on those animal elements, because there are the only things that we know about her are those physical appearances.
But would you say that the lack of form kind of gives you the freedom to portray her any way that you want? Because really, because as we alluded to, the only documented forms of the Bell Witch are when she's in animal form. But there's also that I think it's like an engraving where William Porter is actually trying to throw into the fire, and she's like wrapped up in a blanket or something like that. Mm-hmm. So do you feel like? So do you feel like it was both challenging and liberating at the same time to kind of figure out how you wanted to portray the Bell Witch, while at the same time kind of staying true to the legend of who and what she is?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like I said, we really saw it as more of an opportunity. I think I spoke last time in the episode of The Lady in Red that, there were characters that we took creative liberty with. And there were all four of them we took creative liberty with. And Lady in Red and Bell Witch really gave us the most opportunity because they weren't as defined. And Bell Witch more so because of that lack of physical appearance, right? With her, we really built out a narrative that I don't think anybody had ever alluded to, or maybe had come to the conclusion about the Bell Witch. And so in order to, I guess, really sell that world and that story to our audience, we needed to kind of make her fit some of our perceptions, some of our intentions for her character. I drew a lot of inspiration from a movie. It's Middle Eastern. I forget which country, but it's called A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, where this main character is just we would call her in rehearsals the very weird girl that you see a lot in film, right? I think the first one that always comes to mind to me is Allison in The Breakfast Club. And so we really wanted to lean into that. And when it came to giving her that physical appearance, just leaning into that dark goth, the smudgy stuff around the eyes, weird girl, physical appearance.
Yeah, kind of like what you would see in The Ring or other movies like that.
Yes.
So another thing that I wanted to ask you too. So in terms of appearance, it's one of those things where it's kind of left up to your interpretation, because there really is no exact form. So what we know about the Bell Witch is that she's famous for speaking, right? And you alluded to this already, the fact that you are focusing so much on her voice, because her voice is pretty much her presence, right? She doesn't have she doesn't have the same luxury as Marie Laveau, for instance, who is famous for for being the voodoo queen, or La Llorona, where depending on the culture in Latin America, she's wearing either white or blue. How exactly did you create the voice, or what kind of technique did you and the actors kind of develop in order to create a distinctive voice for this character?
Mhm. So I think it began in the writing process, really. I'm sure that I mentioned this before, but Mythos, the play, originated as a series of 40-ish poems about just like separate female experiences, and then they all got compiled and assigned to each character that we decided to explore.
Yeah,
So when I was writing The Bell Witch from the beginning, I really wanted to lean into stuff that was strange. I wanted to lean into what we call in theater the grotesque, like stuff that makes us kind of unsettled.
yeah,
And it wasn't so much because I like just wanted to weird the audience out, but because the voice of the Bell Witch, I mean, a paranormal spirit, like it's supposed to leave you feeling uneasy. And the experience that the Bell family had with her was that they were always on guard. That, it talks about how, the Bell Witch would like pinch the children and poke them with needles. And, like it was just always that feeling of having to walk on glass. And I really, in creating an immersive piece, I really wanted the audience to feel that. I wanted the Bell Witch to say things that didn't feel good to you, things that like made you think twice. And part of that was, we have her in the play. She sings a drinking song whenever John Bell is murdered, killed, or dies, depending on how you want to look at it.
yeah.
And in that drinking song, she said, like, we really wanted, or at least I, as a playwright, really wanted to, like, contrast that, the mourning and the grief that you feel in that moment, like at a funeral, that's supposed to be very formal and very intimate. And I wanted to be transgressive, and say, like, yeah, like, what's more transgressive than to sing a drinking song at a funeral, right? So that was kind of the foundation for it. And whenever I handed off, those words to the actor that originated the role of the Bell Witch, she just, I mean, she ran with it. And I think another really important element beyond the voice in her performance was the movement. I really encouraged them to look at, again, like movement that was grotesque, like the horror theater of Anton and our Toad. We just like, we wanted to creep people out. And I think that actor also really saw it as an opportunity, that they would do things with their voice. I remember one of the things that I gave them was, if you've seen Jordan Peele's Us, Lupita Nyong'o, like the voice that like the alternate self has, that like is like super gravelly, and like it when you hear her voice in that movie, it just makes you like, ugh, like it gives you goosebumps. And that was something that I had told that actor to look for, or look to for inspiration. We just really wanted to lean into the horror movie feeling, I think, with that character, and that the writing, and some of those vocal techniques, the movement was really important to communicating that.
Well, yeah, because the Bell Witch kind of like goes from being like the stern authority figure, because we hear stories of of the Bell Witch telling Betsy Bell, for instance, hey, when you go around this bend, you're going to want to hang on, otherwise you're going to fall out.
Mhm.
To, as you said, being very transgressive and very irreverent when she's singing that drinking song at John's funeral, to kind of being a bit of a wise ass, especially when Andrew Jackson stops by the house, and she's like, oh, you better be careful, General, because one of your men isn't who he says he is. So it's kind of, so I would say, like, out of all the characters that you've written, I think the Bell Witch has has a lot going for her, right? Did you account for all these different aspects of the Bell Witch as you were writing and directing what the actors had to do?
Yeah, I mean, it really, whenever it came down to choosing the Bell Witch as one of our 4 myths, that was one of the driving factors. I mean, part of it was that I love Southern Appalachia, and I think that Southern Appalachia is like a naturally creepy place. But the other is that I think I mean, especially for that time period, right? We expected women to act a certain way. We expected them to behave a certain way. And then you get this supposedly, right? Even though, we don't, there was no need to assign like a sex or a gender to this spirit, but they made her a woman. And I think that that is just so interesting, speaks
Mhm.
to the culture of that time. That she is doing all these things that are traditionally unladylike. And so, yeah, it was a real opportunity to just like put a woman or tell the story of a woman who like truly does not give a heck what what men think of her, what they perceive her as. And I really wanted to, whenever we were directing this particular actor, I kept pushing her to really like, I was saying like, jump off the deep end, don't be afraid, because I think even in modern society, right, we in theater, even though we're starting to break those rules now, there's still, a female stereotype for characters, right? We have different stereotypes. And I really just wanted to put a female character on stage who, before being a woman, she was just a human being. And so every time that she experiences something like, for example, the stuff that happened to Kate Batts, right? The people that they had coming into the home to try to drive out the spirit. We treated these all as transgressions to her. And what do you do whenever somebody confronts you, is fighting against you, is wounding you in that way? Historically, the way that we portray women doing that is that they are meek and they're submissive and they quiet down. And whenever you meet with resistance, it's something that's not it's unusual. So in the show, we really wanted to just respond to those basic human emotions, something that like I think is perceived as feminist, but it really should just be humanist, right? That like when we were telling that story, I remember specifically directing that actor, like, how would you respond just as a person? How would you respond to having your home invaded, right? Like if truly she was a spirit that was just disturbed, what did it feel like to have somebody take your home away from you? So that was at least one of the things that we focused on.
Yeah, and that's what I find so interesting is the fact that when you're developing a character, right? Even if it's a character based on legend, obviously you want to stay true to the legend because it's something that everyone's familiar with, but at the same time, you know, you definitely want to put your own stamp on it because obviously if you're writing it and you're directing it, you want you want your aesthetic to kind of come through in all of this. But another thing that I kind of have to take issue with, because, like I mentioned before, with the other characters, Marie Laveau, the lady in red, La Llorona, they can be presented in a sympathetic light, right? Whereas here, I don't really know how exactly you go about making the Bell Witch sympathetic because right off the bat, she's just going at it. She's like she's attacking John Bell whenever she can. She's hitting at poor Betsy Bell. Like there's one incident where she just basically tells Betsy, "Hey, that guy that you really like, you shouldn't marry him at all, right?" So there's a part of me that kind of wonders how exactly do you take someone who, at least from my perspective, is the instigator in a lot of these incidents, and how do you kind of present her, in a favorable light, in the same way that you present, the other characters in your play.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is also one of those circumstances where I had to remember, I think it personally for me, the most compelling narratives in horror are those that don't present like a very clear good and a very clear evil, right? I think with all of these characters, La Llorona is a great example of it. The best that we can do is understand them and not excuse what they do. And so the Bell Witch is one of those, obviously, because all she does is terrorize this family who, according to legend, didn't necessarily do anything bad to her. And so that's where that creative liberty comes in. One of the things that I just like, as I was doing my research, I kept noticing this obsession that she had with Betsy Bell. And I was like, wouldn't it be so interesting if she's doing all of these things because she loves Betsy? She's in love with Betsy. And so then I saw like an opportunity to tell the story of like, sexuality as well. Like, if, or like queer, like female stories. That was an aspect for it as well. I recognize that that is creative liberty because I know that that's not part of the legend. But I just saw, like, I was like, this is a really cool storytelling opportunity, right? Like you said, you know, her at the Bell Witch at her worst was whenever Betsy became engaged to Joshua, right? And so like it just seemed like a really cool opportunity to be like, well, what if we tell this story and we kind of like show it in a different light?
Right.
So that was part of it as well. But I think that the other part of, you know, putting the Bell Witch in a more understanding, favorable light, as you said, is going back to that, like, at its core, right? To me, that story seemed like this family came into her home. This family disturbed her. And whenever she began to resist, fight back, right? They're like, oh, well, this is our space, right? But this is, you know, like if she was whatever, like if their house was built on the Native American burial ground, whatever it was, if she was a spirit of like light and evil, whatever, that was her home. And a family comes in, and whenever she responds, they begin to attack her back. And all of a sudden, she's the villain, you know?
Yeah.
And so that was something that, I don't know, really compelled me, drew me to that character. I didn't want to, because there's so much question around the origin of her, I didn't necessarily want to make a very clear parallel of, you know, imperialism and colonialism. I think we do that later with La Llorona. But that was part of it as well. I think that you do see kind of the repetition of this theme in the Bell Witch's tale, that she is attacked, attacked, attacked. And all that she does is respond. You know what I mean? We could see it as like, oh, she's terrorizing this family for no particular reason. But again, there had to be some kind of break. There's some kind of transgression there whenever they came into her home, into her space. And we also saw an opportunity, for example, with Kate Batts, who is allegedly, you know, connected to the Bell Witch. And once it's proved that she's not, Kate Batts is still, you know, pushed away from society. She's still humiliated. She still loses her dignity because there's a literal witch hunt that happens around her. And I think that that is a perfect metaphor for the same thing, or example for the same thing that could have happened to the Bell Witch, and a theme that we see later, you know, in this, or before in the Salem witch trials, just this theme of, you know, women being attacked, and then whenever they respond or they fight back in a human way, they're vilified. So that's more so the story that we wanted to tell as well.
Yeah, because based on the description that you're presenting here, she's not so much as the instigator as she is a reactionary, right? Whereas you know, most people, when they look at the Bell Witch story, they say, oh, well, clearly she's the one who started all of this, and John Bell is doing his best to fight back because, you know, she's causing all these problems for him and his family and his slaves, right? So you did mention Kate Batts, and actually that's a pretty good transition. So another question I wanted to ask is, how much does Kate Batts, you know, factor into your play? Because for the longest time, you know, there's this misconception that Kate Batts was identified as the Bell Witch when she was just, you know, an innocent bystander who kind of got looped into this whole mess, and just based on circumstantial evidence that she had a beef with John Bell back in North Carolina. She happened to live pretty close to him in Adams, Tennessee. She kind of gets, you know, unfairly targeted, but at the same time, we also can't ignore the fact that she did factor pretty big in the narrative. How big of a character was she in your play?
Yeah, Kate Batts, I think, like I mentioned just now, we focused more, I guess, on, you know, representation in the sense of, like, you know, the same thing that happens to Kate Batts is what happens to the Bell Witch. But we really treated her as a bystander, because at least in reading, in the research that I did, it just felt like this woman was pulled out virtually out of nowhere, and she was just used as a scapegoat to excuse the stuff that these people were doing to try to find the Bell Witch. And at the end, you know, she's humiliated, she's attacked. So really, she gets a very brief mention. I know that historically that might be a little unsatisfying, but to me, I felt like this was just so much more. This story is so much more about the Bell Witch, this particular vitriol she has for John, against, it seems, almost like patriarchal figures in general. And I think that Kate, in my interpretation, was just somebody who got caught in the crosshairs.
Yeah, just because her name just crops up at one point, they're like, it's her, and they just start running after her for some reason. But to be fair, but to be fair, like, she really doesn't do herself any favors too, because she does have that reputation that already kind of makes her an outlier in society, you know.
Yeah, well, I mean, but that also, like, it goes back to our, like, what we expected women to do. I mean, not even in that time, but now, that, like, she was an outsider, but she's also just a woman minding her business. And then, like, just because she has, beef with John, that, like, she's immediately, like, pulled into this. And, when she responds in whatever way that she does, like, she just gets herself more attacks. I don't know. I think it's very telling. I mentioned this before, that I think society at that time really told on itself by having a figure in the urban mythology like Bell Witch. I think that she's very and Kate Bass's association with her, I think, is very representative, right, of what we expect women to do. Like, how dare you not speak to other people? How dare you be an introvert and an outsider to society? Society is your status as a woman during that time.
Yeah, and we are talking about the antebellum South too. So this is a society that's very much structured and hierarchical, right? I mean, someone like John Bell, he's the head of the family, he's the head of the household, and what he says goes. So so when you have someone like the Bell Witch come in there, kind of turn things on its head, it's bound to make get everybody's attention, because of the fact that this is not only a spirit but a female spirit who's decided, I'm going to go ahead and just buck the trend, because I'm not having any of that, based on what you're presenting in the play. But I do want to shift gears a little bit, and I actually do want to talk about the Bell Witch herself, because she is a very interesting figure. And like I said, I've done some research over the past week. You've done a copious amounts of research on your end in order to write this character. So I want to go ahead and dive in. So what we know about the Bell Witch, as we've already established, she was this disembodied spirit who haunted the Bell family from 1817 to 1821. And the average layman, when they see or they hear the story of the Bell Witch, they're just going to say, "Oh, she's just an instigator who's going around tormenting this poor family for no reason," right? But as you described in your play, she's very much she's not so much an instigator as she is reacting to a system that is pretty much trampling all over her homestead, because we are talking about a period where America is starting to push westward, right? Tennessee is slowly being developed, and it'll eventually become another state in the Union. But what I also find interesting about the Bell Witch, and maybe you can talk about this in greater detail, is the fact that even though she torments John and Betsy Bell, right, whatever her reasons are, or her own reasons, she is equally kind to to John's wife, and she's also very I mean, what's the right word to say, like a fascination or sort of friendly rivalry with the son, John Bell Jr., because when I'm watching these videos, or when I'm reading up about the interaction between John Jr. and the witch, it's almost as if they kind of respect each other, right? Because she doesn't torment him as much as she does his sister, right? And what I find fascinating too is the fact that even though John Sr. is the patriarch, it's like if he tries to put his foot down, like the witch just laughs at him. But when John Jr. kind of steps in, she's like, "Oh, okay, I know I won't mess with you, so see you later." And then Lucy Bell, it's almost this maternal. I guess I could say maternal, like there's a sort of like affection that she has for Lucy, which I find a bit odd, because you'd figured she'd be a bit more maternal to Betsy Bell, really. So can you talk about that kind of aspect of the Bell Witch, where she's simultaneously cruel and yet kind to the same family?
Yeah, I think it's something that we see a lot in even like like ghost hunting shows, right? And like in horror, that spirits tend to pick up on the emotional state of people, right? And even in whenever we talk about like supernatural hauntings and stuff, it a popular theme that we hear is that like, oh, even though you've moved into a house and there's a spirit associated with that, once that spirit has attached itself to your family, even if you move somewhere else, it will follow you, right?
Mhm.
We also hear that spirits tend to show themselves more and more aggressively whenever they perceive that somebody is afraid of them. If you choose to believe in the supernatural and the paranormal, these are some of the themes that we see. Um,
Right.
I think that at least whenever in our show, we really portray the relationship between Bell Witch and John to be kind of a power dynamic shift. I think it comes down to if the Bell Witch, if that spirit was particularly perturbed because the fact that somebody came to invade her home, it is only natural that she would be mad with the head of that household, right? Because he is the one that made a decision to take them there, take his family there. He's the one that is establishing that power there, and there's that kind of face off. I think with John Bell Jr., we can only speculate as far as to that relationship. I know that in our show, maybe if it does come down to power dynamics, John Bell Jr., he's maybe an heir, right? And maybe having that respectful, more peaceful relationship between those two means that whenever it comes time for him to inherit that house, that land, he'll go elsewhere, right? We don't want to terrorize him because what if he tries to do the same thing as his father? That was one of the questions that we asked. In our particular show, we already talked about the fact that we think that the Bell Witch had some kind of crush on Betsy. That's our speculation.
Yes.
That's our speculation. That is not written anywhere. But at least whenever we were exploring that character, one of the questions that came up was like, maybe that's why she likes her mom, because maybe they look alike, right? Maybe they act similarly. Maybe, there's just something about the mother that reminds the Bell Witch of Betsy. I think that removed from, that theory or whatever, it could be also that if it's a power dynamic problem, that maybe the Bell Witch sees that in this culture, in this society, the wife has to be submissive to her
Mhm.
husband, right? And so, John established his presence here. He himself trespassed onto my land, but his wife, you're just I guess a casualty, right? You just followed him because that's what's expected of you. And I can sympathize, I can empathize with that. So, those are just theories.
Mhm.
What we can do, I think, with this character, but I do think that that's where you see those family dynamics come into play. Um, and in when you see the patterns of the way that she haunted this family, I think that it seems that the spirit very much glued on to particular family members based off of that relationship and that perception. It wasn't just a, like, I guess, one size fits all haunting. It
Yeah.
was very custom, it was very tailored.
Yeah, and I was gonna say too, because because when we look at the story, it seems like the only person who really was afraid of the witch was Betsy, right? Because because John Senior, I think it was just more of like frustration about having to deal with this, and Lucy Bell, I think it was just more of, well, I'm just here. I mean, what else can I do? And then John Jr., he kind of like takes on a more assertive role. So based on what you said, it kind of makes sense that Betsy would kind of receive, I guess, the worst of it, right? When it comes to the Bell Witch. You also mentioned too that Appalachia is one of your favorite one of your favorite areas to study. I guess we can call it, excuse me, Appalachian Gothic.
Mhm.
What is it about that particular part of the country that just makes you say, "Oh, I wonder what's going on here. I better look more into that."
Yeah. Um, I wouldn't say that I was born and raised in Appalachia because I'm like a little, like shifted off to the Charlotte area, but I
Yeah, you're a city girl.
yes, city girl. But I grew up visiting that area a lot, and visiting the kind of landmarks that we're used to down here, or at least like in the Blue Ridge Mountains, like Mystery Hill, and I think that there, like personally, just what draws me to Appalachia is that there's a feeling of like, we're scared of what we don't know. And I think Appalachia, especially in the early days of the United States, it was just like an area of vast wilderness that was unexplored. And even to this day, like, again, as a city girl, right? Like, I think sociologically, our perception of Appalachia is like, and this is not mine, but I think culturally sometimes we say like, oh, well, those are the Hicks, right? Those are like the people that are not as progressive as we are, and they have a backwards mentality. And I think that that kind of sentiment of shoving off to the side and alienating these people just based off location has also created this kind of fear. I mean, I think socially, but also just like we could talk about, fear culturally about what we don't know, about these people that we don't know.
Right.
I think a lot of the like really inappropriate and like not correct jokes sometimes that we make about not we like societal we about Appalachia, about like cousins marrying cousins, things like that. It comes down to the fact that we don't know what happens out there, right? There's a culture, there's a society there that we don't necessarily understand, and I think that that has created a lot of potential for the kind of urban myths that come out, or even just like legends, tall tales that come out of Appalachia. I think a lot about that I have friends that grew up there, and I'll like be walking with them, for example, and I'll just like start whistling casually, and immediately they're like, no, you need to stop doing that. Like there's because of the idea that calls spirits to whistle or to sing at night. There's just like these little myths and tales, because you have a part of the country that is removed, that for a long time people didn't explore, and you get these like just little creepy like legends and myths that come out of there. And I think there's just kind of like, I guess, a mystical perception of that area that really draws me to the stories that come out of that place. I think, cities have their own thing, but there's only so much that you can pull out of, subways and skyscrapers and things like that. Being out there in nature, out in the wilderness, in parts that are unexplored and things, and whenever things happen that you can't explain, I think that there's just something magnetic about those type of stories.
Well, not to mention too, because living in in a city like Charlotte, for instance, it's very much developed, right? It kind of reminds me of an episode of The Simpsons where Bart and Milhouse they go to debunk every myth about Springfield Elementary, and when they debunk the last myth, they're like, "So school is just a building where kids go to learn?" And like, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's how I feel about Charlotte, is because we've developed every inch of land down to the root. There really is nothing mystical about it, whereas Appalachia, right, it's a different place. It's untamed, it's very mysterious. I was going to ask you, do you remember the manhunt for Eric Rudolph from way back in the day, like late 90s, early 2000s?
No, I was toddler age during that time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh god, I'm giving away my age now.
But I would love to hear about it.
But okay, so in a nutshell, Eric Rudolph was, I guess you could call him like a domestic terrorist, because when I was in school, like I think like fifth grade in like the late 90s and early 2000s, he committed several acts of domestic terrorism, and he fled into the mountains of North Carolina, right? And what was fascinating was the fact that he wasn't caught immediately. It took I mean, you had like squads of police and FBI scouring that part of North Carolina for months and even years looking for this guy. And I would even recommend you check out. There's an episode of the '90s. It's a documentary from CNN that explores different aspects of the decade. And there was an episode where they were interviewing an officer who was taking part in the manhunt for Eric Rudolph, and he was talking about there were caves that are really, really, really deep. You don't know where they go, and they're like snakes as thick as your arm, and they're like spiders as big as your hand, and stuff like that. And it just made me think, like, how wild of a place could could Appalachia be? That a man who commits these acts of terrorism can just go out there and hide for years and years and never get caught. Now, eventually he did get caught because, he was just rummaging for food, and an officer just arrested him for, rummage, for, I guess, picking through the garbage, and then they found out who he was, and then he got booked as a result. But the reason why I bring that up is because when you were talking about Appalachia, it's a place that's just so foreign to us. Not only is it because, it's in a different part of the state that most people really wouldn't frequent that much, but the fact that it looks foreign, right? It's untamed. It's not a place that hasn't been developed to the hilt like you see like in other parts of the state, right? Um, have you have you ever felt like that the landscape itself is intimidating, and you could sort of understand and see where the rise of folklore comes from in that
Yeah,
area?
for sure. One thing that I was thinking about whenever you were talking, and you'll have to fact check me on this, but I think that Linville Cavern, there's a popular like meme, I guess, that goes around the internet that like shows that I think it's the Sierra Nevada, and the Appalachian Mountains, and the Appalachian Mountains just look so puny, and like the West Coast was making fun of them, and somebody was like, well, that mountain range has existed like when there were still dinosaurs around. Like it's like it is a crazy old like part of geography of the United States. But I think it's Linville Caverns that like there were no fossils found in it because like it was prior to their like being animals in that part of the world. So like whenever they were excavating it, they didn't find those things. I might be wrong, but I feel like I remember that. But like if you just go and visit that part of the state of, this region of the country, like, yeah, like there's so much potential for there to be stories like spiders the size of your hand, because like it's unexplored, it is ancient, and so of course it's going to be a little creepy. So I think that like just the actual geography and natural landscape of that area lends itself very naturally to that. And we see that in other parts of the state, right? Like where's Bigfoot located? Right, we tend, you don't necessarily hear of cryptids I mean not even Mothman, because he's in like the deep parts of West Virginia,
Yeah, like West Virginia, Ohio, that area.
yeah. And so like we assign like I think these very mystical roles to the parts of the country that are still underdeveloped, because it's again hard to have like, Bigfoot in Charlotte.
Yeah, and I was gonna say too, because to go back to the Bell Witch, when when you tie her to Appalachia, it kind of makes sense, right? Because because we're talking about an area of the country that even in the early 19th century hasn't been fully touched or explored by by people from the East Coast, right? So to your point, when you have someone who is very irreverent, very transgressive, it kind of makes sense because she's the spirit of the land. She represents exactly what the land is. It's untamed, right? Now, another thing that I found interesting too, and please feel free to chime in and add your own thoughts on this. She's very omnipotent. That's what you come to learn about her, is the fact that she knows all these things. Because I think there was one story where there was an English visitor. He stopped by and visited the Bell home, and he challenged the witch, and he said, well, what's my family saying in England? And she actually tells him, yeah, this is what your family is saying right now in England. And then there's and another story that comes to mind is when John Jr. Has to go away on a trip, and the witch tells him, if you go on this trip, it's not going to end too well for you, because it was a business transaction he was trying to do. And the witch even added, hey, if you don't go on your trip and you stay in town, you'll meet this lovely woman from Virginia, and there's a huge chance that you two might get married. Obviously, John doesn't put too much credence into it. He goes away for a month, and the business deal falls through, and then the lady ends up not marrying him because he wasn't there to sweep her off her feet. So when it comes to the Bell Witch, as much as we want to malign her, and just say she's either an instigator or reacting to what's going on here, there's also no denying the fact that there's a lot more to her than what we simply want to assign her, right? Did you have there been any particular episodes or stories from or from the legend that you kind of took to heart as you were writing this character, and maybe kind of like see if the actor is familiar and try to incorporate those elements into their portrayal of the witch?
Yeah, I think largely something, the word omnipotent is a really good, I think, descriptor for the Bell Witch. Largely something, a theme that we try to pull out of her is that she's sort of a visionary and sort of timeless, in that same way that because she had almost some of these like oracle like abilities in that time. In our story, we're like, wouldn't it be interesting if she begins to touch on subjects and like topics of things that or female experiences that people are dealing with now, right? And in her the last section of the Bell Witches chapter, I guess you could say, in the play, she begins to make references to modern times, right? Things that are happening today. One of
Right.
that we mention is like the insurrection, like gently, like we talk about it lightly in that final poem. So that was something that I really wanted to capture because in writing this entire play, I really didn't want to get caught up in going into particular like bits of history or like I don't know how to explain it. Like, I guess I didn't want to lean into the hyper realism of these characters because that is something that you can find, right? That is something that has been done before. That's why we know these characters is because of their oral history. So I wanted to focus more on, I guess you could say like large idea, right? And that's how we get that bit about the Bell Witch that I was like, well, I don't necessarily want to include Andrew Jackson in my play, but how do I
That's the best part, though.
I know, no, I understand. I think that it is I think that how can I explain this? I
I'm
was
gonna be sitting. I'm gonna be sitting in the front with my arms crossed, just saying,
yeah, like
"You
where's
have Andrew Jackson here." I
no,
want to see Andrew Jackson take on the Bell Witch.
well, and a part of I think creating this show was that like I know that at least whenever we brought it to the town that we performed it in, people hadn't heard of these characters before. And so some of them, La Llorona, like everybody has heard about her, but we wanted to, instead of just being like, oh, here's like this little ghost story, we wanted to explore the bigger like topic, like the bigger ideas, make people think about things, and then lead people to go and do that research on their own, or like go and Google like Wikipedia Bell Witch, like tell me all the things, because like that's how I became inspired for these characters. Some of these characters like I had not heard of before, but these ideas, these like female experiences, whatever, that like I was trying to connect to them made me want to dive more and learn more about their story. So I think with the Bell Witch, the way that we captured that omnipotence, right, was that elemental feeling of putting her voice everywhere, like those predictions. We did talk about because it made sense for our story that she told Betsy to not marry Joshua. We included that in there. But
what about the because there's another story where she actually takes exception to, I think his name is Dean or something, and she turns him into a donkey and she rides him all the way to his house. Did
I
you
didn't hear about that one.
Okay, so apparently there was this guy named Dean, and he was famous for being the best axeman in Tennessee, and he carried a witch ball with him, right? Because he knew that he would run into the witch, and the witch encounters him along the way and says, hey, give me your witch ball or I'll turn you to a donkey. And this is and by the way, this is like a really, really dumbed down, stripped down version of it. I encourage you to check out that story on your end if you have the time. But long short of it is, Dean says, no, I'm not giving you my witch ball because then you're going to hurt me. And she's like, right, I'm turning you into a donkey. And all of a sudden he like finds himself on all fours and he feels like this pressure on his back. And he's like basically like running all the way home. And he's like, okay, never mind. I think I will give you my witch ball. Never mind.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I definitely need to look into that story.
He also, I think it was also the same guy where when he saw the black dog, the Bell Witch as the black dog, he decided, being full of piss and vinegar, he was going to take a swing at the Bell Witch, and he actually struck the black dog with his axe. So when he saw the dog again, it had two heads because cleaved it in half and it was doing the Hydra thing, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think, with these ghost stories, and particularly with Bell Witch, that is more of like a haunting. Honestly, like, I think that is like, that's what draws me to these ghost stories, that there's just like, there's such how can you say, there's such a legend associated with it, that I think that once you begin to dig, you begin to find those things out. You begin to like unravel the thread. And I think in our play, I think what we were more concerned about was getting people to the point where they could find the thread to start unraveling it. So we touched lightly, I think, on those elements of her ghost story. And I mean, we were also limited to 60 minutes. So there's so much that you can do with maybe like the 15 minutes that she got of stage time, to tell the very, like, I didn't even know that thing about the donkey. So there's definitely like a lore associated with her that's hard to capture. Yeah. Oh, I lost your audio, I think.
Oh, so
Okay.
I was gonna say, like, if you do write another play about the Bell Witch, I mean, you can definitely include that story in there because it's very cool.
Yeah.
So another thing I want to ask you too, because because when it comes to telling stories about historical figures, whether they're ghosts or political figures or whatever, sometimes there is an association with a production that doesn't go down too well. I know. So the most famous one is the Scottish play, right? And the myth is, if you say the name of the play, bad things will happen. In modern times, the um, the BBC did a production of I Claudius, which was based on the book, and apparently, if you write a book or you do a play or a TV series about the Roman Emperor Claudius, bad things happen, right?
Mhm.
So when it comes to telling the story about the Bell Witch, have there been any strange encounters, anything weird? Did you like find yourself encountering like strange happenings, like all of a sudden like the light in your living room just going off for no reason?
Mhm.
Anything bizarre happening there?
It was something that we joked about whenever we started the production, that we were like, wouldn't it be funny if, and what the one, strangely enough, the person that we were actually concerned about was the person playing Marie Laveau, because in order to play Marie Laveau, she had to do some research about voodoo and hoodoo. And she was like, God, I don't want to accidentally conjure anything. But surprisingly, the person that had really the only interactions, or like just strange occurrences, was the person playing the Bell Witch. Immediately after we started, it was a devised production. So whenever we started devising sessions, they would go home to their apartment, and like the door to their closet would like open and shut randomly. And it wasn't like the
Oh,
draft.
dang.
Yeah, the draft is like moving it. It was that like it would unclick and then click back. And usually it was doing it at night, whenever she was sleeping. And one thing that we had happen also frequently in the production, and it was awful because it was a very short production time, is
Mhm.
that we were rehearsing in a black box theater that was at the bottom of a hill. Um, and this was like, I want to say like January, February, a time famously in North Carolina where it like snows, but it doesn't like, that's really, or like ice falls, but that's really the weather that we get. We experienced flooding in that theater like 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
Like at the bottom by the door, and like there was just like always an unusual amount of rain, and for some reason it always happened during our rehearsal time. Like there was never, it wouldn't, I don't know, it was weird. Maybe that was just the weather being bad with us, and it wasn't
I
supernatural.
mean, you were at the bottom of the hill,
We
mind
were
you.
at the bottom of the hill, so it was normal that it would flood. It was just strange that it was that time of year and that it would only happen during our rehearsal time. And sometimes it felt like the moment that we walked out is whenever it stopped. But I think the biggest thing was that in that theater, all, an older theater, but one that I had not experienced this problem with after 4 years of being at that university and doing shows there.
Mhm.
The light grid was always very reliable, right? We sometimes you go to a theater and there's like a light that's always flashing, that's a little weird. We had a light during rehearsal whenever we had work lights on that all of a sudden started flickering. And I had not ever experienced that problem before. We were like, oh, well, maybe it's just funky. And then during Q to Q, another light, only during the Bell Witch, like it was a green LED, would flicker during her.
And it was always the same light, right?
It was always the same light. And it was even whenever we experienced the work light flickering, it was in the same location of the theater. And so it was like, gosh, like this like corner of the theater is not lit well. But that was the interesting thing, is that I assumed that it had to do with I forget what they had to rewire something for a special that we had for La Llorona. And so I was like, oh, whenever like La Llorona's like piece starts, when the light switched to blue, that corner will still flicker. And no, like it was the same light, it was blue, it would not flicker.
Right, it would stay on.
It was, yeah.
Okay.
And so I don't know what it was about that particular light. It was only during the Bell Witch's monologue. We only knew because those LEDs were like, you know, they would switch colors. And so we knew that whenever we were transitioning from green, which was the Bell Witch color, to blue, La Llorona, we all of a sudden were like, oh, like they were fine for this part of the show, but then the rest, like during the part before, it's not working. So we never managed to figure out what that was about.
But it wasn't like that bulb was like all of a sudden decided not to work. I mean, I'm assuming you were using the same bulb and worked pretty well, because I mean, I'm not an electrician, but I'm assuming like if you use, you know, a bulb for like, you know, a play, it's going to stay working for however long it takes, right? Did it confound the lighting people at all, or did they just say, oh yeah, it's just the witch doing her thing, you know?
Yeah, we just kind of went with it. One of the things that we were I think the creepiest thing that happened was that during our, like, that was already kind of something that we were like believing. We were like, oh, maybe we are getting a little haunted.
Yeah.
Whenever we were blocking, the actor, again playing the Bell Witch, would occasionally find like bruises on parts of her body, like without explanation, and we were like, well, maybe you're anemic. But she was like, no, this is like the first time that things like that have happened to me. So, you know, at that point, yeah. So she would get like bruises like up and down here.
And she's not, and she's not, and when you're blocking, obviously you don't have, you know, the set furnished yet.
No, and I mean, it's a very movement heavy show, but like, you know, they weren't like, you know, it would have been bruising on her knees, on her shins would have been normal. But finding them on forearms was unusual. So, you know, by the time that we were putting on the show, like we were like, oh, it's just Belle. That light that's not working, it's just Belle. If we have, you know, like a bad thing happen during the show, it's just Belle.
Well, now you've piqued my curiosity here. Michelle, did the bruises go away like once production ended? Like,
I think that after, it was something that appeared during blocking and working. During performances, she wasn't getting bruises. So I don't know what that was about.
okay.
Because she's still performing, the actor was still performing the same show, doing the same things. But really, once the show started, I don't remember her mentioning the bruises anymore, if she was still, you know, getting them.
So when did all this occur exactly? Like, was it occurring like during the fall or the winter or what?
It was the rehearsal process for the show was November through February. The interesting thing is that we then took the show to tour. We toured it to Kentucky, and we didn't have anything strange happen during the touring production. It was a very quick turnaround. It was like 1 week of rehearsal and then like the performance that weekend.
Yeah.
But I don't remember anything unusual. And we were all like kind of getting ready for it, because on our drive to Kentucky, we did cross through Adams, and it was a shame that we couldn't stop by to.
I was gonna ask you guys stopped.
too. We were like trying to convince our driver. We were like, please, and like, no, we're doing a 6-hour drive to Kentucky. I'm not stopping.
Yeah, we're on a schedule here.
Yeah, we're on a schedule. But yeah, it was weird. I think the hauntings that we experienced, if you want to call them that, were really during rehearsal and working, and performance. Other than the light, we didn't really see anything. And on the touring, we didn't see anything.
Now, in terms of the haunting, you know, for lack of a better word, this only occurred during the Bell Witch section, right? Because with the others like Marie Laveau, the Lady in Red, and La Llorona, it was pretty much smooth sailing. I
Yeah,
imagine.
yeah, 100%. Like I said, we were worried about Marie just because I don't necessarily subscribe to the supernatural, maybe not. I do
You might
believe
want to change that, Michelle.
I'm not gonna do that. Especially somebody who wrote this show, maybe I should. But I do have like a strong, I guess, spiritual belief that like if you don't understand something, maybe don't mess with it. And that was one of the things I had advised this actor to do research about voodoo. But I was like, don't practice anything. And she was like, well, maybe. And I was like, don't practice anything. But yeah, we didn't experience any haunting with the other three, just Belle.
Well, I was going to say because I'm assuming this is the first time you're actually telling someone outside of production about this. So, so I was going to say like because you said you're working to get this staged this year. I would say that that's a pretty good selling point because if you think about it, it's kind of like when the Exorcist got released. A lot of people were just as interested in what was going on, during production as when the movie came out, right? I think that would be a great selling point for you, Michelle, if you just went out and said, "Oh, by the way, here are a bunch of these weird things that occurred when we did our first production of it. The actress got bruises, that light kept flickering, the doors were, opening and closing all by themselves. I think it's a great marketing ploy, really, and I think it kind of would work in your favor right there.
Yeah, honestly, it would be great. The one thing that I'm scared of is that we're going to be doing some of the rehearsals for this upcoming show in my apartment. So I really hope.
Don't do the Bell Witch. Don't do the Bell Witch.
Yeah, I really hope. Yes, it is a great marketing point, and I 100% would go see a show. Somebody told me that like it made them experience hauntings, but also like I don't want to bring any spirits into my home.
Well, Michelle, if it makes you feel any better, I give you permission to use this episode or clip this portion of the episode and use it in lieu of marketing, just so you don't have to actually go through and kind of repeat yourself. You have my permission.
Thank you.
On that one. I'll even send you the timestamps too when I do the editing. But really, all jokes aside, that does speak to the omnipotence of the Bell Witch because over 100 years onward, I mean, she still has that effect on people, right? Some people, because I remember watching Ghost Adventures and people would go into that cave and, I think the curator would say, if you take a rock from the cave, bad things are going to happen to you. Mm-hmm. And I remember that they showed like segments where people were like reading letters from, from the curator and just saying, I took the rock and then my brother-in-law got a car accident. I got diagnosed with cancer. So I returned the rock. Please take the rock back, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So it kind of just goes to show that this is a figure. And I would even say this is a figure out of all of the, 4 figures in your play that you really don't want to tread lightly with. Like, did you ever get that as you were writing and producing that play?
Yeah, I mean, I would also say that there was a weight with all 4 characters that I wanted to respect their stories and I wanted to respect the culture and society that they came from. Mm-hmm. I think that's a big burden to carry as a playwright. And sometimes also why I wanted to stick more towards, I guess, how could you say, maybe like broad strokes rather than a lot of detail, just because I think it's, and with the Bell Witch too, because there's such a lore associated with her. There's so many stories that I didn't ever want to misrepresent or, tell something that was like a half truth. So yeah, I think there's a pressure of from a playwright's perspective to tell a story that is true, but I think there's a difference also between like history book true and experience true. I think with the Bell Witch, we definitely leaned more experience, that we wanted you to feel that the truth of that haunting, of that terror, I guess, that the Bell family felt. And sometimes something that you don't have to spell out so literally for people. If you capture, I think, the essence of it, that that'll bleed into your interpretation of the character.
Right. Because everybody's going to walk away with their own idea of who she is. I was going to say because I know right now you're keeping things under wraps because you are working to get Mythos produced for 2026. if you end up having any more of these spooky experiences like you did the first time around,
Mhm.
please let me know right away so we can do an episode chatting about that.
For sure, for sure.
Please, please. So I want to go ahead and start wrapping things up because I mean we could talk about the Bell Witch for hours and hours, but I feel like I feel like for at least for this conversation we've pretty much covered what your goal was and how you're trying to portray the Bell Witch in a more sympathetic light.
Mhm.
Um, you did mention that there are many stories surrounding the Bell Witch. Is there a particular story, or are there like a couple of stories that stand out to you that you feel I really enjoy like this story of the Bell Witch because it's so cool? Because for me, it's the one about Dean the Axeman getting turned into a donkey and then being ridden home, where his wife finds the witch ball on the front porch. Is there any stories that kind of stood out to you as you were doing the research or as you were writing?
Yeah, I think, as a playwright, I love the idea of her singing drinking songs at the funeral. I just thought that that was a compelling image. But I think as Michelle, one of the things that you touched on earlier during this conversation was that she was just kind of a smartass. And for me, I love that John was on like hunch. He like wanted to know the origin of this spirit. And every time that he would bring people in to have a conversation with the spirit to try to speak to her, to try to satiate her, she'd be like, well, actually, I'm this. Like I'm a spirit from a Native American burial ground. And then she shows up as a dog. And then she says that she's a spirit of both heaven and hell. And then she's like, oh no, I'm a happy spirit. I've just been disturbed. And so I think that this, like, I love the idea of this spirit just toying with these men, and they're like very seriously trying to uncover, you know, to like remove her from this house. And she's like, well, here's what I am, but no, I'm not, just kidding. That was something that I really enjoyed, especially whenever I was talking to the actor about it, and I was giving that as an example, inspiration for her to kind of play off of.
Mhm.
That yes, she was terrifying and a horrible spirit, but also she was playing these like very serious older men.
Well, not horrible, misunderstood, just in case.
But
Just in
yes,
case.
case. But yeah, I think that's one of my favorite things about her.
I was gonna say too, because I know we alluded to this briefly, but I really love the fact that Andrew Jackson took an interest in the Bell Witch, right? And I think he famously said, "I would rather face the British again rather than face the Bell Witch," right?
Mhm.
Because we were talking about the guy who was a war hero during the War of 1812, right? A man who was tough as nails and just you know he was a self-made man. He didn't take shit from anybody, right?
Mhm.
And even a guy like that, Old Hickory, knew, yeah, I'm not going to f with with the Bell Witch. Um,
Absolutely.
but Michelle, I know this is something that you're still working on. Mythos is still something that you're working on because, and I think you said that you're. Did you say you're like rewriting some bits of it or what?
I have, I tentatively say, because I think that once I introduce this script to four new actors, we might learn that some things need to change, and maybe we'll include Andrew Jackson just for you. Um, but it is tentatively done, maybe.
Right.
Yeah, before this next production.
Gotcha. Um, One last thing. So whoever happens to play the Bell Witch, are you gonna mention the bruises that the last actress got, or are you gonna make it kind of deliberate that whoever the current actress is doesn't contact the previous actress?
Thankfully, well, this could be both benefit. I see it as beneficial. The actress playing the Bell Witch in this iteration was La Llorona in the first production.
Oh
So
my god.
not only does she know, but I think she's kind of into it. I think that she thinks it's cool. So I'm gonna let her just do her thing.
Michelle, if you can, please put me in touch with the actress who played the Bell Witch initially. I want to talk to her. I want to get the full deets on that because, oh my god, I'm like, I have never, like, you can't see it, but I literally have goosebumps right now, like, as you're telling that story because I'm like, it's, it's pretty warm where I am. I'm not gonna lie, I'm wearing a t-shirt and everything. But when you mentioned when you mentioned the bruises and all that, I was like, oh man, like I'm starting to get a little bit freaked out here. You didn't no, you didn't experience anything personal, right? Like you didn't wake up one morning and see like blood dripping down your walls or anything,
No,
right?
no. I this is something that I do for myself in practice, but maybe it worked to dispel any spirits, is that I have just kind of like a ritual for myself that every time that I come into a rehearsal, I
Mhm.
like say like a thing like I'm here, and then like, and this is what I want to happen, and when I leave I'm like, and this, and I'm leaving, and this is what I'm leaving behind. So maybe the spirit was nice enough to take that as a suggestion.
I just have this image of you, and I don't know how you take it, but it's not meant to be in a bad way. I had this image of you like walking with like a purse full of Palo Santo wood, like when you walk into the theater, you like light it up and you just start waving it around.
I know. I think honestly think that the actor that played the Bell Witch did sage out her bedroom after like the closet experience that she had, and maybe that helped.
Well, Michelle, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day to come on here. I know you mentioned that you were a little late because there was a bit of an incident on the highway, so thankfully you are safe. And I would encourage you to stay safe tomorrow, because tomorrow is going to be a very big day. And if you don't have to be out on the road, please don't be on the road, because people are going to be crazy as hell. But I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to watch our episode of the Bell Witch. It's a very interesting topic. This may not be the last time we talk about the Bell Witch, but other than that, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one.